Now, let me be a little bit informal. We want to make the most of our time. We have 2 hours. We also have a kind of a mixed panel, 3 speakers up here, but also 2 far away, and we will have actually Skype. I normally don't do Skype conferencing, but so please get the Skype ready. Now, we have first the president of the APCSS alumni worldwide, and this is a very distinctive American name. He's a lieutenant general. His name is Dan Fig Leaf, and he'll be our first speaker. He's going to provide just a few remarks, I think, just a few minutes, and then we'll proceed to Ambassador Charles Salmon. Now, Lieutenant General Leaf is from the US Air Force. So APCSS, Asia Pacific Center for Strategic Studies, is based in Hawaii. It's attached to the Pacific Command of the United States military. And it's quite a big military organization we know as PACOM. And APCSS is the think tank of PACOM, attached to PACOM. So let us first hear from the Air Force General. Hello, General.
Thank you for the kind introduction. But I can't tell if everybody could hear unless they respond with aloha. So let's try that one more time. Aloha.
Aloha.
Our alumni know that that's a tradition at the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. I just want to say a few words before we turn it over to Ambassador Charlie Salmon, and many of you know, former U.S. Ambassador to Laos and former Foreign Policy Advisor to the Commander, U.S. Pacific Command, and our Foreign Policy Advisor and one of our remarkable faculty members. Can you hear me all right, by the way?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, good. I'll correct the record a little bit. APCSS, as our alumni know, is not really a think tank. We're an educational institute, and we bring remarkable fellows, like our alumni, in and give a comprehensive education through 6 different courses in security matters from crisis response to counterterrorism to advanced and transnational security cooperation. We've got over 7,000 alumni around the world. We're really proud of them. They've many very successful heads of state, chiefs of defense, ambassadors, and generals and admirals. So those of you that haven't come to see us, please do. Well, it's for a course or just to stop by. We'll start our next Advanced Security Cooperation course a week from today. And just to give those who are not familiar with APCSS a little understanding, we'll have right now set at 91 folks from 38 countries here for 5 weeks. So we get a remarkable group in and learn as much as we teach. Charlie's going to talk about the rebalance, and he's got some great thoughts that not just from his own ideas, but from what we hear from all those international visitors who come to the center, as well as U.S. military leaders. And we're blessed to have a lot of support from Admiral Locklear, the PACOM commander, and all of his component commanders, the 3 and 4 stars who work for him, as well as Washington. So we get a variety of perspectives. I'll say just a couple things about the rebalance from my perspective as a former Deputy Commander of Pacific Command. First of all, it is real. It's not just a phrase. It's not just a slogan. That the U.S. government, the entire government, is trying to implement a strategic shift in focus to focus on the Asia-Pacific region. The second thing I'll say, it's not a return to the Pacific because we've always been here. Charlie will probably share that. Third, it's not about containing China. It is not about containing China. I say again, it is not about containing China. Certainly we're concerned about some of the aggressive behavior of China, but we're more interested in influencing China and others and events to promote a secure, prosperous, and stable future for Asia Pacific, because we all have a piece in this. It's globally important, the region is. And secondly, it's possible. Things are generally going right in Asia Pacific. So this is as much opportunity as risk. There is a legitimate place for U.S. military deterrent capability in the rebalance and in Asia Pacific. It's been a healthy force here for decades, but it is not a containment. It's about the broad feature of the U.S., of the region, and of course of our allies and partners. So, Charlie will go into more detail. I really want to commend our alumni organization for being part of this undertaking. It's a first, so you guys are setting the standard for a 55 alumni association wide, and we commend your use of technology. We'll be interested to see how Skype works. It's worked for me. I'm honored to have a chance to say a few brief words, and if there's nothing else for me, I'll hand it off to the esteemed ambassador and let Charlie Salmon spend the rest of the time.
General, is the ambassador with you there?
Ready to go.
Okay, in that case, I think you've already introduced him more or less, so let's proceed to Ambassador Salmon, please.
Okay, thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, General.
And again, thank you and aloha.
Aloha. Ambassador Salmon, thank you for joining us. We're in Bangkok here. It's in the morning, and I don't know what time it is in your zone. You have come from a distinguished diplomatic background, ambassador to Laos and Cambodia too, I think. Right? Laos and...
No, just Laos.
Laos, okay. Well, that's more than enough. So please go ahead. Well, we have about 15 minutes for you, so whatever you would like to say. The Asian pivot, rebalancing, how does it look today?
Okay, thank you very much. I would just like to echo General Lee's commendation for our Thai alumni. They've done a terrific job, but all of you have done a terrific job. I'm very honored to be on such a distinguished panel. I wanted to recognize the presence, I think, of my old friend, John Brennan from the Asia Foundation. The Asia Foundation is a very distinguished organization which has accomplished a great deal in the Asia Pacific region, and particularly, I think, in Thailand. I want to also recognize that the moderator of this panel, Professor Pintian, was a very distinguished speaker at a conference we had back in, I think, 2002. So I'm honored that he is chairing this group. And I guess finally, as a preliminary, I would say as a one-time director of Thailand affairs in the State Department, I've been always followed Thailand very closely, and I'm enormously happy that in November, your Minister of Defense and Secretary Panetta signed the basically the joint vision statement, which was the first time this had been revived in almost 50 years of our alliance relationship. And I think that in itself is a good example of vitalization of alliances, which is so much a part, a pivot, or I guess better use now, the rebalance to the Asia Pacific. What I'd like to do first is to answer the question of your very distinguished keynote speaker, General Bunsuram, who asked whether the second Obama administration and the new national security team, especially Secretary Kerry, but I also think of Secretary Hagel, would continue the rebalance strategy. And I will not keep you in suspense. They certainly will, but I'll get into that a little later. Now what I would propose to do, if it's okay with you and if it works, I'm somewhat new to this technology, I'd like to go through the slides I sent to our friend Rudy very quickly, and then to leave, because I know I'm not allowed more than about 10 or 12 minutes for my presentation, and I know General has used a little of that, and I don't want this to be an APCSS hogging the time. So can I see the slide you have available? Okay, the slides. You have them on, okay. First, okay. What these slides really do is give you an idea of the evolution of the rebalance. I think it's very important that we all understand that. The first slide is, and I believe in stating the words of our leaders and officials. I'm not so big on opinion pieces. I think we should learn from what our officials tell us. And the first slide is from Secretary Clinton's speech here in Hawaii at the US Center in November. And you will notice that it's very clear that she emphasizes the world strategic and economic center of gravity is shifting to the Asia Pacific. But look at the last sentence where she talks about locking in increased investment and so forth. People, I think, should understand that one of the reasons, strong reasons for the rebalance was President Obama's commitment to revitalizing the American economy and creating jobs, and he saw that possibility in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, the second slide, I hope you see, is from the President's speech to the Australian Parliament in November. This was after APEC, which was held here in Honolulu in November 2011. So Secretary Clinton basically set up, as they say on television, set up the stage for the president, and then the president spoke to the Australian Parliament. And he talked about achieving my highest priority, and that's creating jobs and opportunity for the American people. Again, the rebalance has a strong economic content, and the jobs issue was very important. And then you see his strategic decision that the U.S. play a larger and longer-term role in the region. I would note, and you'll see a slide on this at the end of this quickly, is the National Security Advisor, Tom Donilon, in his latest speech on our Asia policy, emphasizes the President's speech to the Australian Parliament is still the most important in terms of the rhetoric of the The third slide is from our defense guidance, which was issued in January 2012 in the presence of President Obama. It was rolled out by then Secretary of Defense Panetta. And you can see very clearly, while the U.S. military will continue to contribute to security globally, we will rebalance toward the Asia-Pacific region. The next slide is from Kurt Campbell, who recently left the position of Assistant Secretary of State. Assistant Secretary Campbell is extraordinarily well known in the region, a great public servant, accomplished much, and is one of the architects of the pivot. And he talks again about the focus on the Asia-Pacific and the importance of seizing opportunities there. The next slide, Leaf has already made this point, is that the rebalance is not about China. It's not about any individual country or group of countries. It's basically about a peaceful region where all countries can enjoy the benefit of security and continue to prosper. Now, the next slide, give you a little non-American flavor, is from the recently published defense and security guidance by our friends in Australia. And that makes a point I think is critical for understanding the balance, is that the U.S. is integral to global economic growth and security and provides the critical underpinning to the rules-based order that exists today. And that's certainly true in the Asia-Pacific, and your keynote speaker, I think, alluded to that in his presentation. Now, the next slide is from a Brookings publication, Brookings Institution. The thing is called Big Bets and Black Swans, and it was conceived of as a presidential briefing book for President Obama's second administration. And this particular part is from a piece on China done by Kenneth Lieberthal, a very distinguished sinologist who was on the National Security Council during President Clinton's administration. And he talks about the need, if you will, to rebalance. He says produce desirable results, and but the region strategy is also generating dynamics that increasingly threaten to undermine its primary goals. I think by that he's referring to the concern of China and by the concern of others that somehow the rebalance is Chinese focused and is essentially a sort of code word for containment of China. That isn't the case at all. But anyway, Lieberthal is pointing out the negative possibilities here and has advised much more intensive conversations between our president, Mr. Obama, and the new Chinese president, Xi Jinping. Now, the next slide is, again, in this evolution of the concept, is by former Secretary of Defense Panetta. And I think the important thing here is global security is not a zero-sum game, nor are American commitments. And he talks about Europe, but Europe too is very much tied to the Asia Pacific, and he notes that the European Union is China's largest trading partner, and you in ASEAN is the second largest trading partner, and talks about the interest of both the United States and Europe to become more outwardly focused and strengthen security institutions in Asia, like ASEAN. Now, you know, ASEAN already has a very full plate of consultations with Europe, especially within the ASEAN. But clearly, Panetta here was responding to concerns by our Euro-Atlantic partners that we had gone too far in the direction of rebound and we're ignoring Europe. The next slide is almost one of the last speeches Secretary Clinton made as Secretary of State the end of January this year. And she says much attention has been focused on the military moves in the region, but she said, you know, the rebalance is much more. And she talks about response to the Japanese disaster, the Korean-U.S. free trade agreement, and so forth. And I think interestingly, she talks about the so-called pivot. Basically, you know, that pivot has somehow become a bad word, although, as you know, President Obama used it as late as November in his foreign policy debate with Governor Romney. But she generally tries with the comprehensive way of. Now the slide is from our new Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel. These are his confirmation hearings on January 31st. And then he talks about why the Department of Defense is rebalancing toward the Asia-Pacific region. He makes his commitment very clear. I will continue this rebalancing, even continue to work closely with our longtime NATO allies and friends and with partners and allies in other regions. The next slide by our Vice President, Ms. Biden's remarks at the Munich Security Conference in early February. And he's talking to a European audience, and he talks about Europe is the keystone of our engagement with the rest of the world, catalyst of cooperation. Nothing has changed. And he answers the question, are we taking our focus off Europe as we reasserted we're a Pacific power? And he said it's quite the opposite. It's in Europe's interest for the United States to engage more broadly with the world, and particularly with the Asia-Pacific region. And then he talks about the USA, Europe have an important peaceful and growing. Now, the next slide is by our new Secretary of State, John Kerry. And this is fairly recent. He was talking with Senator Carr after meeting with Senator Carr, the Australian foreign minister, and he was specifically asked, and this was to General Bunsaran's query in his opening remark, keynote, as to the question of my commitment, our commitment to the rebalance. Consider me equally as married to, if not more married than my predecessor. But I think the word pivot, implied a departure from somewhere else. And I don't think that our rebalance and our engagement has to be at the expense of anybody else. And I think that's a very important. The United States is a global power, and we have global interests. And of course, the rebalance recognized growing importance of the Asia-Pacific region, but it is not meant to undercut or denigrate the kinds of commitments we have in every part of the world. And set the carrot says we're not rebalancing at the expense of important relations, but we are balancing. We're going to continue the commitment and we'll continue the relationships. And finally, there's a quote from our National Security Advisor, Tom Donilon, and basically, as he mentioned before, refers back to the President's speech to the Australian Parliament in Canberra in November of last year. And he talks about the overarching objective of my country in the region is to sustain a stable security environment and a regional order rooted in economic openness, peaceful resolution of disputes, and respect for universal rights and freedoms. And then he talks about the particular multi-dimensional strategy that we have designed to achieve this, strengthening the alliances, and I mentioned the revitalization of the US-Thai alliance, which we saw in November, deepening partnerships with emerging powers, countries like your ASEAN colleagues, Indonesia and Vietnam and Malaysia, and building a stable, constructive relationship with China, empowering regional institutions such as ASEAN, and helping to build a regional economic architecture that sustain shared prosperity, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So let me just look at briefly. I think a lot more will be revealed. Secretary will be making his first visit to Northeast Asia later this month. He will be visiting Southeast Asia for the ASEAN Ministerial in Brunei, which I think is early in June. The President will be meeting with the Prime Minister of Singapore next Tuesday here in Washington. And so in the statements that are always accompanies those kinds of meetings, you'll see more and more a sort of clarification, if you will, spelling out of what exactly the rebalance is all about. So let's conclude, if I may, quoting, it's always, even though I'm long retired, it's always safe for bureaucrats to quote other people in the bureaucracy, usually higher-ups. But I thought this speech was a particularly good one, and I commend it to you. It's by our Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia and Pacific Security Affairs. There's no slide for this one. Mark Lippert at Georgetown University in Washington back on the 1st of March. And Lippert, some of you may remember, was on the national security staff. He was very close foreign affairs to the president when the president was a senator from Illinois. Very thoughtful person, and he also is a terrific writer. He used to write a lot for the president. And he is asked, posing the question, so what is the rebalance all about? And he said, my answer is as follows. The rebalance is about maintaining a system that the U.S., working with friends, partners, and allies, allow peace and prosperity to flourish for the last several decades. This brought millions, if not billions, out of poverty and led to unprecedented economic and cultural growth. And we want this to continue. We want it to continue, but it is because it is good for our friends like Glenn and the Lies region, but also because selfishly it is in our interest. The US Pacific power and our fortunes are inextricably linked to the Pacific. That precisely the United States has been deeply engaged in the Pacific for decades. Republican and Democratic presidents, time of surplus and debt, partisan gridlock and comedy, war and peace, and it's precisely why that I know we will continue there for decades to come. And let me just finally close with a personal observation. I first had the good fortune to visit Thailand almost 50 years ago as a young Foreign Service officer in the entourage of Lyndon Johnson. And it's been, I've been fortunate enough, never fortunate enough to be stationed in Thailand, but I've been stationed in your neighbors in Laos and Vietnam and in Burma. But anyhow, I've always followed with very great interest the continuing good fortunes of Thailand and the prosperity that you've made. And a little early, I think I'm 2 weeks early. Let me close by wishing you a happy Songkran festival. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Salmond. And your data, evidence, pronouncements, and announcements are very convincing. So I think that you have shown that the U.S. has a strong, lasting commitment to this rebalancing. Now we will proceed with the panel. So we'll have to say goodbye. Thank you very much, and we'll take all your comments into account for the day. And you'll be hearing from us about the results and conclusions and findings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And again, thanks to our Thai alumni for creating this first and I think tremendously successful effort. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're back to our usual program, which is to have speakers that you can see in the flesh. There is one shift that I have to first announce. Kun Kavi Jongkit Thawan, our leading regional affairs expert and also senior fellow at ISIS, cannot be here today. He's in Paris. He has not. We were not able to convince him to fly back just for this. But in his place, and with his kindness, Bob Fitz has agreed to speak 5 to 10 minutes on this subject. Bob Fitz used to be a U.S. ambassador as well to Papua New Guinea, and he is retired, living in Thailand, and also a senior fellow with ISIS Thailand. So let me go in the order that we have slightly shifted. First, I want to start with John Brandon. Let us hear from John first. John Brandon has an intimate relationship, 35 years ago, is a long time, 1978, when none of these big buildings are around. So John knows Thailand over the years, seen the changes and dynamics of this country over the decades. And he also has traveled widely, extensively in the region over the years. His main job is with the Asia Foundation as the Director for International Relations and Regional Cooperation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Titinan. And also it's a pleasure to be on the panel with Jim Sursett, Bob Fitz, and Charlie Salmon when he was on Skype. As Dr. Titinan said, I came here 35 years ago, and so it's nice to see friends in the audience and to meet new ones. I was struck by some of the remarks that General Bunsang had made this morning, and it made me reflect on when I first came here. And if you look at the region back in 1978, when I was just out of college and came here to teach English at a university here in Bangkok, and you look at the region today, I mean, the transformation is just simply remarkable, and it goes well beyond just tall, more tall buildings. At the time, U.S. did not have relations with Vietnam. It had withdrawn its troops just less than a few years before. The Khmer Rouge was in control in Cambodia. Laos was very much under the wing of Vietnam, and while the U.S. had relations, they were very nominal. And Burma was, Myanmar now, was a very isolated country. If you wanted to try to go there, you could only get a visa, at least for Americans, for one day, and I think it was for most people. And so when you look at the, just how the region was interacting, or really more not interacting with themselves, quite remarkable. And Thailand's economic growth. It was about $500 a year per capita, and today it's about close to 5,000. And if you take in purchasing power parity, it's over 8,000. But yet there are challenges that are here, and as General Bunsang said, it was more on the transnational issues such as disaster relief, transnational crime, food and health security, and I mean getting into the transnational crime, the trafficking of persons, arms, ethnic and religious conflict, environmental degradation, maritime piracy, just to name some. And what this really means is that countries today, under the umbrella of ASEAN, really have to cooperate together if they want to ensure their peace and their prosperity and stability in this region, in Southeast Asia, and for Asia more broadly. Charlie Salmon and General Figleaf were talking about the pivot, or I think the better word was rebalancing. And when you look at that, the rebalancing was really more paying greater attention to Southeast Asia. And that pretty much started from the get-go of the first Obama administration. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's first trip was not just to, normally it customarily been to Europe or the Middle East, but her first foreign trip was to Asia. She went to China, she went to Korea, she went to Japan for the obvious reasons. But she also went to Indonesia, and she visited the ASEAN Secretariat for the first Secretary of State ever to visit it in over 40 years. And so doing that, the U.S. was the first country to name a U.S. ambassador to ASEAN. It established a U.S.-ASEAN leaders meeting that has been held every time since 2009. And along with that, they strengthened alliances, traditional alliances in the region, Japan, Korea, but also the Philippines, and also other bilateral relationships, particularly places like Vietnam and Singapore, but even some of the others, and most notably, as of late, Myanmar. The U.S. was the last major power to sign the U.S. Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. They've established the Lower Mekong Initiative in trying to help this part of Southeast Asia, which is less developed than insular Southeast Asia, to develop. Really, the most developed country by far in mainland Southeast Asia is here in Thailand. As I mentioned, the diplomatic outreach to Burma, Myanmar. This really plagued U.S.-ASEAN relations before reaching out to Myanmar. It was always like ASEAN -1, and I think ASEAN did not appreciate that the U.S. was sort of looking at the region as a set of bilateral relationships. So I think there's been concerted effort to look at the region in a more comprehensive, integrated fashion. Secretary Clinton talked about ASEAN being the fulcrum of Asian regional architecture. So the U.S. is putting more stock in ASEAN. But at the same time, at least in my travels here in Thailand, but elsewhere around Southeast Asia and even in other parts of Asia, you would hear that that there are two concerns primarily about this rebalancing. One that Charlie Salmon was getting to before, and I believe General Figleaf referred to, was will the U.S. remain committed to Southeast Asia in the second Obama administration? Our U.S. interests and responsibilities are indeed global. And so as much as maybe wanting to pay greater attention, including and encompassed in that more resources, you are, problems in the Middle East, in Syria, the U.S. drawing down from Afghanistan, all of these things when a crisis or problems flare up, it tends to draw away maybe the attention that we want to pay. It doesn't mean that we don't want to and that we're ultimately not going to, but there are sometimes factors that come up that are unexpected and that it draws our attention away. Another example is the economic crisis in Europe. We still need to see what who is going to be the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia. Kurt Campbell has left. No one seems to know who there's an acting Assistant Secretary in Joe Yun, who's a professional diplomat. He's been superb, and he's very committed to the region. And he, when I first met him, he was posted here as the economic counselor at the embassy in Bangkok. Senator Kerry clearly has a demonstrated interest in Southeast Asia based on his experience, 40 years ago when he served in Vietnam. But even as a senator and on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for a very long time, was always interested in the region. Came here often. Known his foreign policy advisors who know the region and the Asia Pacific region more broadly. There was a criticism before the rebalancing is that, well, the U.S. sometimes doesn't show up to meetings. That has happened consistently since 2009. No major foreign policy figure has missed ARF. The president has come to the East Asia Summit once the United States became a member. That is going to continue, and I don't believe any meetings are going to be missed in that regard. But I think one of the things that is people who are in the region are concerned about is perhaps maybe the U.S. having too much of an emphasis on security issues in the region. And I think that the Obama administration has become sensitive to this, and I think what's part of this rebalancing now is to be able to try to add an economic component to this. For the longest time, from up until about 2007, the United States was really the largest trading partner with Southeast Asia from 1868 to 2007, aside from during when we were at war with Japan. The U.S. was the largest trading partner in the region. And just over 20 years ago, and I said 1868 when Ulysses S. Grant was president, not Richard Nixon, just over 20 years ago, Chinese trade with ASEAN was only about $8-9 billion. And today, I think I saw a figure that's something like $382 billion. So when Charlie Salmon and General Figleaf were saying it's not about containing China, certainly on the economic front, if we are trying to do that, we're doing a terrible job. And I think China is important to the region. I think everyone recognizes this, and we want to see, everyone wants to see in Southeast Asia, the United States, and elsewhere, as China as an important actor who can contribute to stability and economic prosperity in the region. So what does the U.S. try to do to recalibrate its rebalancing? Even though we're no longer the largest trading partner, it's still significant. It's about 180 some odd $180 billion. ASEAN is the U.S.'s fourth largest export market, the fifth largest trading partner. Something was announced at the East Asia Summit called the Expanded Economic Engagement Initiative. And it's also known as the E3, and it's designed to expand trade and investment ties and business opportunities with all countries in Southeast Asia. And for those ASEAN nations that are interested, the initiative can lay the groundwork for ASEAN countries to adhere to higher standards of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which the new U.S. is negotiating with 4 ASEAN countries: Brunei, Singapore, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Now, some question, I mean, when President Obama came here, Prime Minister Yingluck said that they would consider the TPP. But there were genuine concerns, about that. Is this somehow this higher standard benefiting the United States but not benefiting other actors? The U.S. tends to look at it as that we need higher standards of trade. This is what we adhere to. This is what our Congress demands. And there's 2 sides to this story. So this certainly won't be easy. But there is a U.S. ASEAN energy initiative that's worth about $5 billion, and where there's $5 billion in project finance from the Overseas Private Investment Corporation for energy companies to invest in projects here in ASEAN. And I mean, you have the element of connectivity that we hear so much about. And I think this connectivity is not just, when you hear about it, it's normally connectivity that involves infrastructure, and that's indeed important. And there's a very big debate going on in this country today in Thailand's parliament on $2 trillion or $2 trillion of how to invest in various roads, railroads, port development, and things of that nature. But there's also, how does the connectivity between people, which is ultimately important, and who you want this connectivity to benefit. And I think ASEAN in some ways has to dig down a little bit deeper and how to create maybe greater connectivity between small and medium-sized enterprises and to be able to link their businesses with other businesses trans-border. If you look at all the trade, I mean, I think in small and medium-sized enterprises, it's really quite negligible. It's about maybe 3% related to SMEs in terms of cross-border. How to be able to expand that so the average person in ASEAN, no matter which country they live in, makes that it makes a positive impact on them. How might the U.S. be able to contribute to that, but how can other countries as well as the ASEAN nations helping themselves as they work towards integration by 2015, which I think will still be an ongoing process, but I hope that progress will continue to be made. In terms of the U.S. exercising its soft power, you've had something called the US ASEAN Fulbright Initiative, and there's we're trying to expose, as Dr. Titinan said, I graduated from Northern Illinois University and I studied political science and Southeast Asian studies, and I've had the good fortune to come to Thailand as well as other countries through my work with the Asia Foundation. But there are fewer and fewer people that have been studying, over the years. So where's the next generation of academics, civil society leaders, as well as people in government that have an expertise? And it's the same for, members of ASEAN in different countries to be able to have a better understanding of the United States. And so I think this is a soft power lever that the United States could, that is trying to provide, that hopefully people will take advantage of. Foreign assistance, all right, something that normally in light of difficult budgetary times tends to be things that gets on the chopping block during financial difficulties. For this year, foreign assistance to Southeast Asia is being increased by 17%. Most of that goes to Myanmar, granted, but there's also the lower Mekong Initiative. And Another thing that I had mentioned before about the annual meeting between the President and the ASEAN leaders, that's been upgraded to a summit. And I think that shows that relations between countries and their respective leaders have deepened, which will mean more will be asked and more will be expected by both sides. And so I think the commitment to the region is being clearly made. But what about the ability? The U.S.'s Fiscal House is, some people would describe it, a great deal of disorder. We are over $16 trillion in debt, and and so it's an awful lot of money, and we owe a lot of money to people, and we're needing to borrow more for the nations to pay its bills. So either taxes have to be raised, which some elements of our Congress are vociferously opposed, or there have to be significant cuts, which could include cuts to foreign, to foreign policy, as well as other things, and even to protecting the poorest of the poor in our nation. At this juncture, one thing seems to be sacrosanct, or a couple of things, and that is Social Security and Medicare. And when you add all of these things up, I mean, you're only talking about a fifth of the U.S. budget where you're trying to make all these deep cuts. And that is going to be a challenge for the United States and our ability. So I'm not saying that we're not going to be able to do it. It also doesn't necessarily mean that 3 years from now maybe our economy will be stronger. But in light of global events, economic developments, we still don't know. Our economy is certainly better than a few years ago when President Obama came into office, but it's still a little bit shaky and challenges remain. But I think the United States overall is a resilient country, and I just don't think I'm speaking out of patriotism per se. Finally, let me just add something about China. I don't think, as I said, this rebalancing is not about containing China. I agree with what Charlie Salmon and General Figleaf said earlier with that. But I think it's important that there are challenges in the bilateral relationship, and it's important that those challenges are addressed effectively, forthrightly, and if the U.S. and China can get its relationship right, I believe U.S. relations with Southeast Asia, ASEAN nations benefit from this as well. So I think I probably have taken up more than my allotted time, but again, it's a pleasure to be here, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, John. We will come back to you. And I want to make sure that we have at least a half hour for audience participation, so if you have comments and questions, you will have some time to voice them. Let me go now to Bob Fitz. The issues that John Brennan has brought up are the issues that we want to probe into. For example, the TPP. The TPP is going to have a divisive effect in Southeast Asia. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, sort of like a regional free trade agreement that the U.S. is pushing aggressively now. That has to be understood in contrast to what ASEAN has promoted, and that is the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So there is some different trade policy paradigms now in this region. John Brennan also discussed the foreign policy team. We're concerned about the team. One of the themes that we have for this seminar today is that no more Kurt Campbell, no more Hillary Clinton in the team. So now we have John Kerry, the new secretary, and we don't know how he's going to form his team and his people. Kurt Campbell was really an instrumental diplomat for the U.S. Relations with Southeast Asia and East Asia. Also the debt crisis that was alluded to, the resources to back up this rebalancing, this pivot, questionable. I mean, the U.S. is broke. How could it compete? How could it walk the talk? The approach and posture of the U.S. towards South China Sea, towards the paramount regional security concern in our neighborhood, we haven't heard, and we will go into this, of course, how the U.S. sees the rising tension in the South China Sea and other concerns, the transnational, the NTS agenda and so on, but also Myanmar. Myanmar, very important, the internal conflicts in Myanmar, internal conflict in Thailand, southern Thailand, we have a peace process now. So these are some of the issues that we would like to see how the U.S. sees these issues. So we'll go into some of that. Let me come to Bob Fitz. Chuck Hagel and John Kerry have something in common. They have some experience in Southeast Asia. They are Vietnam War veterans. So they're not alien to the region. But we don't know how they're going to be approaching the region now that they are Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State. I noticed that in the State of the Union address, the most recent one, President Obama did not discuss Asia as much as we would have anticipated. Of course, a lot of the domestic issues dominated the agenda and the speech, but China was mentioned twice, and not South China Sea so much, and not the Asian pivot so much. And then we saw that the president has gone to the Middle East now. It's come back and apparently restored U.S.-Israeli relations on an even keel now. And we also saw John Kerry going to Europe. So this is something that we take as signals, perhaps. Maybe we don't want to read too much into it, but it catches attention that John Kerry has gone to Europe, President Obama has gone to the Middle East. So let me come to Bob Fitz. How do we read the new administration? We know it's Obama too, but the team is being filled now. And we have the overall rebalancing pivot. I don't think that is deniable. Nobody is saying that the U.S. is not is going to change its posture or strategy. No, that's not the case. But how will it be executed, implemented with new personalities and a new team?
As President Obama has been fairly fond of saying, the United States can multitask. And he's said that about his own administration. Indeed, there are a number of events going on in the world that are calling for attention and are getting attention, but I don't think that's necessarily going to draw attention away from Asia. I'd join with John in saying that and also Ambassador Salmon, every indication is you're going to continue to see the very highest levels of the U.S. government coming to the important meetings out here. Asia's going to get the attention. That said, I do believe there's no evidence right now to cause immediate concern, but I think the level of resources the U.S. is able to devote to Asia does bear watching from an Asian perspective. However, as the number of quotes come from Obama 1 into Obama 2, presented by Ambassador Salmon, really do underline the fact that, as then Secretary Clinton said, the United States certainly understands that Asia is the center of gravity of the world right now, what's happening in the world economically. Also, the expanding, there are some security concerns out here, but this is where the action is, this is where the economic growth is, this is where the dynamism is, and this is where the United States really has to be if it wants to continue to prosper. The U.S. fortunes are definitely inextricably tied to Asia. That said, I'd like to start first with the economy. And I'll qualify something John Titian said, that the U.S. is broke. The U.S. ain't broke. The United States government has some very serious issues with its budget and how it's going to allocate the government budget. But I want to really emphasize that the rebalancing toward Asia, the pivot toward Asia, is not just security. It's economic, it's diplomatic, and things that don't directly necessarily draw on the main national budget. And when you talk on the economic side, U.S. firms, U.S. multinational firms, have an enormous amount of cash now. That's one of the questions about the economic recovery, is they have a lot of cash, much of it overseas, and where are they going to spend it? I think you may be starting to see a resurgence of U.S. investment in Asia, and that will be an important part of this rebalancing. And that there's every evidence that is going to continue, regardless of the U.S. budget. I also want to caution on looking at trade figures. It's an easy thing to do. For a while, I was an economist with the State Department. I was the econ counselor here. Just Joe Yoon replaced me, and we're old friends. But anyway, the number of dollars you put on trade figures of, let's say, China with the United States don't really mean what they seem to mean. One example I know fairly well is an iPhone, which in dollar terms costs about $225 US to all the manufacturers when you bring it into the States, and then turn around and sell it for $450, $500 to make a nice profit. Of that, the large components obviously come from the United States, but also from Korea, Taiwan, Japan. All of those are above $20 in the $225 total as it's imported to the States. The Chinese contribution is $2.72. So when the U.S. imports an iPhone that's assembled in China, the U.S. trade figure, import from China, says $225. But actually, that's coming from many different countries. It's not coming from just from China. As a matter of fact, only a tiny piece is coming from China. Then if you look at your regional Southeast Asian trade with China, if you could take every product and break it down into where the components start, who has what share, it would be a very interesting figure, but you can't do that. It's just far too complicated. But what you can do is take a look at what ASEAN's trade with China is doing and what China's trade with the United States and with Europe is doing. And it turns out, depending on the ASEAN country, between 65 and 82% of your trade with China is explained by China's trade with the United States or with Europe. The whole world is tied in together. In the ancient days, 25 years ago, the U.S. used to be so concerned about the enormous trade deficit with Japan. Then it became trade deficit with Taiwan and Korea. Then it became a trade deficit with Southeast Asia. Then it became a trade deficit with China. That's not really a change so much in actual trading patterns. It's a change in where the dollar value is assigned to the ultimate import. But many of the imports from China have substantial Japanese, substantial some Taiwanese, substantial South Korean inputs, and inputs from Southeast Asia. So I guess I went a little long on that, but a lot of people here look at the world and say, okay, we're just dealing with China, we don't need to worry about the outside world so much. That's not true. U.S. is very serious about the TPP. There are a number of very contentious issues, contentious not just within Southeast Asia, contentious with the U.S. Within the U.S., U.S. automakers are very concerned about Japan now joining the TPP because they are very uncomfortable with the number of imports of U.S. automobiles into Japan, and they don't want that to be integrated within the TPP. U.S. beef exporters are very, very concerned. Importers in Southeast Asia of pharmaceuticals are very concerned. It's a very, very complex issue, but in the U.S. view, and there are a number of constituencies within the U.S. that are fighting this, this is, given the essential failure of the Doha round, this is the next step in expanding world trade, which, as several speakers have pointed out, have raised billions of people out of poverty over the last 20 years. The U.S. is also, continuing in the theme that they can multitask, has opened up a free trade negotiations with the EU, which is potentially massive. It doesn't detract from the U.S. attention to the TPP, but it shows the U.S. can do both things at once. Now, given the returning to security, which is indeed an important part of the pivot, there are, as John Brennan said, there are U.S. budget restrictions right now because of the U.S. Impasse within our parliament. If you think you have an impasse sometimes in your parliament, the two sides are in the U.S. Congress are really divided, and there's been a substantial budget cut that's ongoing. It looks like rather than have a grand bargain, which you may have read about, where the Democrats might make some concessions on public entitlements and the Republicans would make some concessions on taxation, that what we have now is going to be continued to kick down the road for the foreseeable future, at least for the next year or so. So there will be some restrictions on military budgets, which will impact on security. But there clearly the statements that we have out of the Pentagon are that the assets will continue to be available for deployment in the Asia Pacific to continue to back up what the U.S. sees as a stable security situation, which has enabled the great growth that you have seen out here for the last several decades. There are limits. There are some real questions and there are some limits. One of them I'd like to highlight, the U.S. has given security guarantees, or not given security guarantees, but the U.S. presence has provided security umbrella. The U.S. has a mutual defense agreement with the Philippines. However, over the last year, the Chinese have essentially occupied Scarborough Shoals, which is a series of islands in the South China Sea that's claimed both by China and by the Philippines. And the U.S. hasn't really done much about it. I'd like to point out, since I haven't seen it in the press here, that the U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty with the Philippines did not cover the Scarborough Shoals like the U.S. Defense Treaty with Japan does cover any land administered by Japan, which includes the disputed islands with China, the Senkakus in Japanese, and the Diaoyu. I should be able to say the Chinese as well, since it is disputed. Well, I'm sort of running on a little bit. So the current planning is their U.S. deployments will continue in the Pacific. There will be 4 literal combat ships which will go to Singapore, which will increase the U.S. ability to patrol in the region. China is clearly beefing up its military abilities in South China Sea and the North China Sea. It's also recently consolidated its civilian maritime services into one Coast Guard. But the U.S. and China really do have a mutual interest in seeing continued free trade going through the South China Sea. The U.S., because so much of the U.S. allies' imports, particularly of energy, go through the South China Sea. That's Japan and South Korea. But also China, so many of its imports, I should have a number, I'm sorry I didn't really organize for today, I just learned at the last minute what the number is, but I think it's 65 to 70% of its energy imports goes to the South China Sea. So there's a great deal of mutual interest that hopefully the U.S. and China will be able to work through closer. Our two militaries are starting to have more cross-fertilization. China is just been invited to be at the next RIMPAC, which is the major Pacific naval exercise that the U.S. holds once a year. And it will be a minor role, but at least they will be there and observe. I would say in the end, I'm starting to meander a little bit. I think the U.S. will, in its rebalancing toward Asia, is working toward what is in everyone's interest, which is, as Judge Armstrong said, rules-based international order, so everyone knows what the rules of the road are, so you don't have people driving on wrong sides and whatnot in the traffic metaphor. But I think the U.S. has to also understand that China probably views the current rules of the road in the world as having been set without a sufficient voice from China, and that China wants more of a voice in setting the rules. And over the next 10 years, we're going to see if they're satisfied with their ability to help set these rules. The last point I will make is that although China has successfully completed its public transition of leadership, which happens once a decade, and it's always a time in the United States or in China or in any country when your leadership is changing, when you can have disparate voices and there's a prospect for things getting out of control. It's not completely over yet in China. It will be, China hands tell me, a year or so before the new Chinese administration is firmly set. There are still some questions. There is a major political figure in China who still is going to be put on trial. There is still some dissent to where things are going. So the situation is still not enough to make you really nervous, but still a little bit shaky in the next year. So we'll watch.
Thank you, Bob. So the U.S. is not broke, but is fiscally challenged. The contrast between the military and the economy is stark. And there's some work now being written about this contrast between, in this region, prosperity on the one hand, right? It seems on course that the ASEAN economies are going to rise, they're going to grow, they're going to expand. The regional prosperity, China, South Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, they will have a good economic fortune ahead. But when it comes to political security, strategic matters, they have more problems. They have more tension. Tension that we've seen in the past has returned, and there are newer tensions. So this contrast is very interesting. When you look at the U.S. with all the news of the debt crisis and all of that, when it comes to the military, they are awesome, they're formidable, invincible. These LCS machines are just unbelievable. They're so powerful. And they have these planes they can take off like a helicopter and fly like a jet, military aircraft. And they've sent some weapons recently, advanced weapons to South Korea in the face of North Korean threats. So the US is still the superpower, no doubt. But it has some challenges, and I think that the key will be whether it will be able to renew itself like the past. It has this inner strength that when it has crisis, when it looks to be in decline, it comes back with new innovation, the IT revolution, and somehow finding new sources, new locomotives to go to the next stage. That's something we cannot tell yet, but the US has that resilience, that inner strength that we've seen in the past. Now we come to our Thai speaker who will present a Thai regional view on this pivot rebalancing. I think it's been established that it's credible. Yes, they have a commitment, but how do we see it from our perspective? We have with us Major General Surasit Thanattang. Major General Surasit is the Deputy Director of the National Defense College. This is the NDC, the Thai NDC. He also has been a scholar soldier in his own right, and he'll rise some more, as you'll see. He also was the director of the Strategic Studies Institute, one of the successors of General Bunsan in the academic field and military. So, General Surasit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chairman, and Also, good morning, the participants, and particularly many of the distinguished guests have been so far working together in this. First of all, thank you for the organizer for inviting me, and it's truly a very much the privilege to be with the ISIS, particularly with the SIU who used to work today, and also see old friend. But it's just sadly that I just come back from the Europe trip, taking my colleagues to Europe, and I have quite very short time for preparing what I have to give you this morning. So what I have with me is that used to be the Strategic Studies Center Director, and also collecting some information from our speakers who deliver their speech in the National Defense College, as I am working right now as the Deputy Secretary or Deputy Director so far. So I think General Bunsan this morning gave us, it's quite clear on how the Thailand look at the so-called even the balancing of power, or balancing engagement, or even we call it the rebalancing of the US in this region. I would like to touch upon the Thailand perspective, collecting from about 2 years until now. Firstly, if we talk about the chief of the regional balance of power, there is no doubt for us that there is the clear concept of balance of power is something in Thailand perspective. We have quite long historical experience to deal with this. Sure, more than 100 years, you might have known. And what we are facing right now is something that we have to talk about, the new rising or new declining in terms of not only the military power, of course the economic power. And last I will touch upon is what the so-called soft power. John touched something on the soft power, both from the Western concept and also Eastern concept, how we look at that. And but the other thing that I would like to say in this term, I said the balance of power is something that we have to apply. Particularly in my observation, I found that in terms of the politics and also in terms of economy, there's many things different. But what the region in this region look at this is something that they prefer to negative around balance of power. And what I can see is now, even China and US, I think we have been already clear by many of speakers. The balance of power game comes through the system of concert. When I say the system of concert, Dr. J talked about the balancing or the contrast even between the military side and economic side. It's quite blurred to me because the US particular, every time I look at the policy or foreign policy, it's very confused to me from which school of thought that the US try to use and combine. So far the fourth school of thought that I learned a little bit, quite very, what do you call it? No, not in depth, but if we talk about the Jacksonians, if we talk about the Wilsonians, we talk about the Jeffersonians, and then we talk about Hamiltonians. So these four schools of thought still confuse me in which part, particularly like this Democrat. So far I learned that Jeffersonians and Hamiltonians influence for what I have seen right now in terms of rebalancing or coming back. Why I said it? When I saw some of the physical security or some of military deployed in this region, so I always ask myself, so what purpose that the new, I can say the second term of Democrat Obama try to do? Is that contrast? Yes, in my opinion. But there might be some any other reason behind that. Of course, I love the word that the US look at the region as how could be work based on the rule of engagement, particularly for the international rule of engagement. Anyway, in case of myself, as we are a small country, and also even the ASEAN has already been integrated or trying to integrate, but still the balance gap between the small country and the major power, we have to consider. If we look at the balancing model, I try to imagine on the both sides, Western should be, of course, and Eastern. If I look at the United States on the left side, China on the right side, so the balance gap is very important for the ASEAN and political for the Thai, which is quite very small comparing with both major power. So I just would like to summarize for this part that for the balancing of power, or even we call it rebalancing of the views. I hope that the word that Ambassador Salman gave us this morning that would be more focusing on the maintaining the system that U.S. used to work with friends here, brought peace and prosperity, and which activity that would not harm any other good system or good relationship between. So, of course, both side, U.S. or China, they have their commitment on the bilateral or even the multilateral. So that the gap that would be considered together. So that's the first point that I would like to share here. The second point is not much, but a little bit on the economic or changing of economic geography. Economic geography, in my point of view, or in terms of working on something on the natural or on trade, I think the most important thing in the human life is security. But what we are talking about, the security, if the economic can we still in the considerable status, like we have heard from the news. So I can say that even China or even ASEAN itself looking quite very hard to deal with properly right now with the Western, particularly for the free trade agreements. I can say that if we talk about the free trade, I have two words to compare every time. That is the equity or equality, equity. And the other word is justice. What we can see now, if we see justice, so many agreement can be seen. Of course, justice, for me, it means that we can, four of us, can look through or pass over the wall together. But Bob can see more than me because he taller than me. That's it. But the equity or equality, what I mean is that how could we look past the wall when I shorter than? So Bob should give me some chair to stand on so that we can look the same, the handicap. That is something that I'm looking forward to seeing in terms of economic shift in this region. Even China to ASEAN, of course. So you have known already, you realize that many of the ASEAN members still have a big gap in terms of the economic development, of course. So within the ASEAN itself, they have to help each other on the equity or equality of working together, of course. And that is what I can say. Even they call free trade agreement, free trade area, that is the thing that they should work together. Last point that I would like to touch upon is soft power. So of course it's significant of the soft power in the global influence. Soft power is an elusive concept so far, but soft power is handled in the ability of one nation to attract support or like-minded from one society or another. In the past, we have seen many of foreign aids, many of cultural the racial project. So far, there is something between hard power and soft power and quite very contrast in the same simultaneously. Thailand has got this problem, of course, with many of neighboring countries. If we talk about how we can balance the soft power and hard power to work it in positive value or in the willingness of both sides. Yeah. So in this connection, I mean the government in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, or even in the on the whole, yeah, have to think how they could utilize their soft power asset, particularly the prestige and the influence. This morning, General Bunsang talked about non-traditional threat of non-traditional security. This is true to me. It's great who producer who established this word because truly there are a number of the traditional that we have to think about. Is that still good? We have to, but still happen some the traditional challenge, but non-traditional challenge give space for joint working for good opportunity on many sharing of not only the asset but also the other resources, so that you can imagine. The word full, it is worthful, I can say, for the soft power. Even it's quite difficult sometimes to build, and not only that we can say, oh, we give them that they will love us. I don't think that's so. So soft power must be from the bottom, my bottom part. I used to study in Germany, and they have the word that the mind moves the body. So soft power must show something that mind moves body. Why I say that? Because the influence of soft power, Thailand may have a close relationship with China, of course, with not only the geographic connection, but also the relative and some cultural and even race or something. That is the thing that Thailand and China have so close connection in that term. A large idea that the Chinese provided to Thailand, and of course the United States used to provide a number of things also in Thailand. But what I would like to say here is that for the soft power, the US has done so far, the diversity, the openness. From last 2 or 3 years, working with the APCSS and on the project, the so-called the Future of US Alliance in Asia Pacific, show the value or the culture and openness to Thai academics, particularly to the military. And I found that also for this regulation, this institutional linkage and framework must be continued more and more. I heard just from above that many program between the US and China. So now they create something on the universal value, so that I can and I see the bright future for the rebalance of the US in this region in particular, if all of us believe and press for the maintaining the system for working with friends for peace and prosperity in the region. That would be my last point, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Secretary.